What if the person closest to you was the one you should have feared the most? It's a question that haunts every inch of this story. The sprawling $13.5 million Brentwood estate was supposed to be a fortress, a symbol of Hollywood royalty, a place of legacy, of laughter, of scripts read aloud at the dinner table. But on the morning of December 14th, that fortress became a graveyard. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Inside, two bodies. Rob Reiner, 78, beloved director of A Few Good Men and The Princess Bride, and his wife Michelle, 70, lay drenched in silence and blood. The cause? Multiple sharp force injuries. The scene? Nothing short of cinematic horror. But this wasn't a movie. This wasn't a script. This was real. And the alleged killer? Not an intruder. Not a masked stranger. Not some obsessed fan. But their own son, Nick Reiner, 32. A screenwriter. A recovering addict. A man who once called his parents his saviors. A man now staring down 2 charges of first-degree murder. But what he allegedly said during his confession, those bone-chilling words, are what truly set this story on fire. I did it, and I'll do it over and over again. Why? That's the question on everyone's lips. And the answer isn't simple. The perfect family, or so it seemed. Let's rewind. To the outside world, the Reiners were a modern Hollywood success story. Rob, the son of TV legend Carl Reiner, carved out his own path from All in the Family to critically acclaimed films. Michelle, a quiet but brilliant presence behind the scenes, was known for her fierce devotion to family. And their children, Nick and Romy, represented the next generation. But perfection, as always, was a myth. Nick, the golden boy turned troubled teen, had been in and out of rehab. There were whispers, rehab stints, rumors of relapses, screenplays half-finished, friendships broken, but still he was family. And family, especially in Hollywood, covers its wounds with PR band-aids and red carpet smiles. Until it can't. When did everything break? What snaps in a person? Is it one moment or 1,000? Neighbors said they rarely saw Nick. He lived in the guest house, kept to himself. But he wasn't some stranger off the street. He grew up in this house, played in these hallways, took birthday photos on that same patio where the police now erected crime scene tape. The very estate that once hosted Hollywood legends was now crawling with forensic units. One neighbor recalled, he used to laugh so much when he was a kid. You'd hear him from across the fence. Then, over time, nothing. Was it addiction? Was it rage? Was it untreated trauma? Or something darker? According to reports, it was Romy, his younger sister, who found the bodies. She didn't scream. She didn't faint. She did something far more telling. She told the officers, there's someone in this family who should be a suspect. He's dangerous. Let that sink in. She didn't say a name at first. She didn't have to. A crime seemed too personal. You don't stab someone out of convenience. You don't use a knife if you're trying to get away with it. You use it if you want them to feel it. That's what investigators reportedly said after examining the scene. This wasn't a hit. This wasn't a burglary gone wrong. This was personal, emotional, intimate. The Reiners weren't tied up. There were no signs of forced entry, no struggle in the foyer, no broken glass, no defensive wounds on Rob's hands. Just a single framed photo shattered on the floor, face down, like a metaphor. This was silent, calculated, and that made it all the more terrifying. A timeline full of shadows. What we know, Romy called 911 on Sunday morning, December 14th. The deaths were ruled as having occurred late Saturday night to early Sunday morning. Nick was arrested that evening in the guest house. But between Saturday evening and Sunday morning, there's a black hole of time. A chilling detail emerged from one source close to the investigation. Nick wasn't panicked when police arrived. He was sitting, alone, quiet, calm, as if he were waiting. Officers who entered the guest house described him as eerily composed. No blood on his clothes. No sign of a struggle. But they found what they were looking for, a small knife tucked inside a heating vent. What does that tell you? Is that the act of a man who lost control? Or one who wanted to make a statement? The confession that shattered the room. Police transcripts, though not fully released, reportedly detail Nick's alleged confession. The line leaked through unnamed sources shocked the internet. I did it, and I'll do it over and over again. It wasn't a plea for help. It wasn't a breakdown. It was delivered, reportedly, like a line from a play. Cold, rehearsed, unapologetic. Think about that for a moment. Your parents, murdered. Your family, ripped apart. And you stand in front of officers and say, "You'd do it again?" What happens in a life to bring someone to that point? What was hidden behind the Hollywood smiles, the recovery narratives, the carefully worded interviews about growth and healing? And what was it that the world missed? Silence from Hollywood, and the world watching. In the days following the double homicide, one thing became disturbingly clear. Silence. No major celebrity statements. No rallies of support. No candlelight vigils in Brentwood. Why? Because Rob Reiner wasn't just a director. He was politically outspoken, high-profile, powerful. And this kind of scandal? It scared people. PR teams scrambled. Netflix quietly paused a documentary Nick had reportedly been consulting on. Friends stopped posting. Agencies distanced themselves. No one wanted to touch it. But the public? They couldn't look away. Reddit threads exploded. YouTube was flooded with breakdown videos. Podcasters speculated on motive. Was it drugs? A psychotic break? A revenge plot? But here's what no one could explain. Why the confession sounded like a script. The real question, why now? Nick had lived in that guest house for years. He'd reportedly been sober. Writing again. Michelle, ever the protective mother, was said to be hopeful about his future. And yet, they died. Did something happen that weekend? An argument? A revelation? Or had the decision already been made long before that Saturday night? Could it be that the killer was building his ending the way a writer builds a third act, patiently, methodically, waiting for the perfect line? And if that's true, then the scariest part isn't what happened. It's what might have almost happened before. On a wall inside the Reiner estate is said to hang a photograph. It's Rob, Michelle, Nick, and Romy, taken at a beach house years ago. Smiling, relaxed, happy. But what caught the attention of a detective wasn't the smiles. It was Nick's eyes, not on the camera, not on his parents, but off in the distance. Fixed, far away, as if even then, he was already picturing something else, something darker. And what comes next will unravel everything we thought we understood. About family, about silence, and about Nick Reiner. What if the house had always known something we didn't? They say homes have memories. That walls absorb arguments. That stairs remember footsteps. That silence, true silence, is never really quiet at all. But that Brentwood estate, that $13.5 million monument to Hollywood legacy, it never slept. From the outside, it looked peaceful. Trimmed hedges, white stucco, clean symmetry, a gravel driveway that sparkled under California's sun. But inside was a very different story. One stitched together from half-heard whispers, tiptoes at midnight, and rooms that were off-limits, even to family. The house looked safe. It wasn't. And long before the blood dried, the cracks had already begun to form. A family divided by walls. It's important to understand something. Nick didn't live with his parents. He lived on the property, in the guest house. Separate entrance, separate key, same blood, same surname. But an entirely different world. Ask yourself, what does that say? Not just about distance, but about intention. Was it about boundaries or containment? Because from the moment Nick moved back in, some say after his third rehab stint, there was a shift. Not the kind you can see, but the kind you feel. Michelle, according to those close to her, became more reserved. She stopped hosting dinners. Her weekly garden club meetups? Canceled. She was home more, but less happy. Rob, always a firebrand, kept working, kept tweeting, kept talking politics, films, the industry. But when it came to Nick, he stopped talking altogether. Don't ask. One friend recalls Rob saying when Nick's name came up at a party, "It's complicated. The ghost in the guest house. You ever live with someone, but never really see them?" That was Nick. Neighbors reported seeing him walk the property at night. No phone, no music, just pacing, up and down the edge of the pool. Across the back patio, near the rose bushes Michelle used to trim every weekend. A groundskeeper claimed Nick would sometimes sit by the koi pond for hours. Staring, silent, didn't even blink, he told reporters off the record. Like he was listening to something no one else could hear. And here's the thing that's haunted me ever since reading that. What if he was? Romy's warning signs. Let's talk about Romy. She's the forgotten piece of this puzzle. Younger, quieter, the one who stayed out of headlines. She was only 27 when it happened, but those close to the family say she always knew something was wrong. Not just with Nick, but with the way the family refused to talk about Nick. You see, the Reiners weren't strangers to trauma. Hollywood families rarely are. They understood addiction. They understood relapse. They understood the cost of success. But what they didn't understand, or maybe refused to admit, was rage. Not the loud, aggressive kind, but the still kind. The kind that simmers behind politeness. The kind that smiles at you in the kitchen, then stares too long after you walk away. The kind that whispers things like, "You think you're better than me. You never really saw me. I could fix all of this in one night." Romy, reportedly, had told a therapist months earlier, "I don't feel safe when I'm home." And no one takes that seriously. The room that stayed locked. Here's something strange. In a house that size, there were dozens of rooms. Guest bedrooms, reading nooks, even a private screening theater. But there was one room Nick never entered. His old childhood bedroom. The one with the blue walls. The bookshelf shaped like a movie reel. The window overlooking the pool. It sat untouched. Michelle had preserved it, like a shrine. But Nick avoided it. Never walked near it. Wouldn't even look through the window from outside. And no one knows why. Some say that room held too many memories. Others say it held too much truth. Hollywood's favorite mask. You know what Hollywood does better than any other place on earth? It hides. Behind scripts. Behind smiles. Behind spin. The Reiners knew this better than most. They were royalty. Their circle included names like Spielberg, Clooney, Sarandon. They weren't just in the industry. They were its architects. So when Nick began spiraling years earlier, the family leaned into their biggest skill. Control the narrative. Articles were scrubbed. Rumors managed. Rehabilitation stories pitched to media as triumphs. When Nick co-wrote Being Charlie, a film loosely based on his struggles, it was branded as a breakthrough. A healing process. A redemption arc. But healing doesn't always look like a movie montage. Sometimes it looks like a man alone in a guest house, sharpening something in silence. But did anyone really know him? Let's pause here. Because maybe you're wondering what Nick was really like. Beyond the headlines. Beyond the mugshot. Some who knew him called him brilliant. Others called him broken. A few called him both. He was articulate, charismatic, quick-witted, but there was a coldness, a vacuum of empathy. Friends, many of whom had stopped returning his calls long before the incident, spoke of a switch. They said Nick could change mid-conversation. That one moment he'd be charming, quoting Kubrick or Vonnegut. And the next, his voice would flatten. His eyes would go dark, as if something had pulled him into another reality. Psychologists have a term for it, dissociative state. But law enforcement has another word. Premeditation. The missing surveillance tape. Here's something that still hasn't been explained. The Reiner property had cameras. Top-of-the-line security. Multiple feeds. Cloud backups. And yet, on the night of the murders, 1 hour of footage is gone. Gone. Not corrupted. Not glitchy. Deleted. Investigators confirmed the hard drives had been manually accessed. And guess where the IP trace led? The guest house. That's not speculation. That's in the report. Which raises the chilling question. What exactly did Nick not want anyone to see? The night the house finally slept. By the time police arrived the next morning, the house was still. Still in that way only death can make a place. No barking dogs. No television noise. No clatter of breakfast being made. Just sunlight pouring into a kitchen, untouched. Michelle was found in the living room, collapsed on the rug. Rob was in his study. Both had wounds suggesting they were taken by surprise. But neither screamed. Not loudly enough for neighbors to hear. Not loudly enough to escape the walls that held them. And that says everything. Because in that house, where secrets had always whispered louder than truth, the silence finally won. The one door left open. There was only one door unlocked that morning. Not the front, not the back, but the side door. The one connecting the main house to the guest house. A door no one ever used. Except, perhaps, the person who always felt like he didn't belong, but never really left. And what that unlocked door revealed next would break open the case and shatter what was left of the Reiner legacy. How well do we really know the people we love? Not the version they show us. Not the mask they wear for holidays and birthdays. But the real version. The one that lives in the quiet hours. The one that only comes out when no one is looking. Because Nick Reiner? He wasn't the troubled son. He wasn't the addict. He wasn't the misunderstood writer trying to find his voice. He was a storm waiting for silence. And by the time anyone heard the thunder, it was already too late. Born into spotlight, raised in shadows, Nick Reiner had every reason to be a star. Born to Rob and Michelle Reiner, Hollywood icons. The kind of parents whose Rolodex included the most powerful people in film, politics, media. He had the money, the access, the name, but he didn't have the light. That belonged to his father. Rob Reiner was the center of attention in any room. Loud, political, outspoken, beloved. Critics adored him. Actors respected him. Activists celebrated him. And Nick? Nick was the background. The son who didn't quite fit the brand. He wasn't suave like George Clooney. He wasn't clean-cut like Tom Hanks's kids. He wasn't a nepotism star or an influencer. He was uncomfortable. Too smart for surface-level chatter. Too broken to play the part. From promise to pain. Teachers remembered him as sharp. Incredibly articulate. A kid who could quote Dostoevsky and South Park in the same sentence. But by middle school, the trouble began. Suspensions. Fights. Detentions. By 15, Nick was reportedly abusing pills. By 17, he'd been to his first rehab. At 19, arrested for possession. Michelle tried to shield him. Rob tried to fix him. But their attempts, according to sources close to the family, made things worse. Because Nick didn't want fixing. He wanted understanding. And in a family addicted to appearances, vulnerability was never on the menu. The masks people wear. Here's the contradiction that'll break your heart. Nick did have talent. He co-wrote a film, Being Charlie, with his father. It premiered at TIFF. Semi-autobiographical. A story about addiction, identity, and trying to outrun your last mistake. Critics weren't kind. But that wasn't the point. It was supposed to be a catharsis. A healing project. Michelle told a friend at the time. This is how we get our son back. But art doesn't heal a wound you keep cutting. Nick reportedly lashed out when the film underperformed. Vanished for days. Friends described mood swings, paranoia, deep resentment. And worst of all, he believed no one actually wanted him to heal. They just wanted him quiet. The family dynamic you never saw. From the outside, the Reiners were progressive, liberal, inclusive, the type to speak out against injustice, the type to march in protests. But behind closed doors, it was rules, hierarchy, expectations. Rob, despite his activism, ran his family like a studio. Everything had to be on brand. Michelle, the peacekeeper, absorbed the emotional weight. Always defending, always protecting, always hoping. And Romy? She stayed quiet. But she watched everything. One former nanny said Romy once asked, at age 12, why is Nick always sad when Daddy comes home? That question never got an answer. But it echoed through the walls. Year after year. Until finally, it shattered everything. A mind fragmenting in real time. Let's get uncomfortable for a second. Because here's what no one wants to say out loud. Nick may have been sick. Not just emotionally, but mentally. One close source, under anonymity, claimed Nick had been evaluated multiple times. Diagnosed with a mood disorder. Maybe more. But treatment was inconsistent. He didn't trust therapists. Hated medication. Accused family members of using psychiatry to silence him. It's a dangerous cocktail. Untreated trauma, emotional neglect, public scrutiny, and intellectual isolation. Add in years of addiction, and what do you get? A man with genius-level intellect and zero emotional breaks. A man who could articulate a character's inner torment in a script, but couldn't regulate his own. The Guest House Journal. This is the twist that'll haunt you. After his arrest, investigators searched Nick's guest house, and they found something. Not a manifesto, not threats, but a journal. Over 200 pages. Handwritten, not dated. Some entries were lucid, almost poetic. Others were violent, incoherent, terrifying. One passage read, "They walk past me like I'm a ghost, but I hear them. Every word, every judgment. They want me gone, but won't say it out loud. That's okay. I'll say it for them." Another said, "She still believes I'm broken. She doesn't realize I stopped being her son years ago." And then, the one that sent chills down every spine in the room. This house raised a monster. But monsters don't cry. They clean up messes. The silent break. Sometime before the murders, Nick stopped speaking to his parents. No fights. No outbursts. Just silence. He'd walk past them in the hallway, sit across the kitchen table, and say nothing. Michelle tried to break through. Left notes, voicemails, ordered his favorite takeout. Rob? He withdrew. He told a friend during a dinner meeting. Sometimes I think we've already lost him, and we're just pretending not to see it. Pretending not to see it. Read that again. Because when people ask how this could have happened, that sentence might be the answer. An open wound that never healed. The night before the killings, Michelle reportedly tried one last time. Sources say she walked to the guest house, knocked 3 times, and waited. Nick opened the door, stared at her. She asked him to come have dinner. No special occasion. Just the 3 of them. He didn't say a word. He closed the door. That was the last time she was seen alive. The legacy of silence. What do you do when someone you love becomes someone you fear? Do you confront them? Distance yourself? Or pretend, desperately, that everything is still okay? That's what the Reiners chose. And it cost them everything. Because Nick Reiner wasn't just a son. He wasn't just a writer. He wasn't just an addict. He was a mirror. One they didn't want to look into until it shattered. The call no one expected. After the bodies were found and Nick was arrested, a phone call was made. But not to a lawyer. Not to a friend. Not even to a sibling. Nick called a former therapist he hadn't spoken to in years. And what he said, what he confessed, would unlock the darkest chapter of this story. What if the loudest warning sign was the one everyone learned to ignore? Because long before police lights washed over the driveway, long before headlines screamed and rumors spiraled, someone had already been afraid. And her name was Michelle, the woman who held everything together. Michelle Reiner was the kind of person people describe as steady, not flashy, not loud, not attention-seeking. She didn't dominate conversations at Hollywood dinners. She listened, remembered names, asked follow-up questions, sent thank-you notes. She was the glue in a family powered by ambition and noise. Friends said Michelle had a gift for sensing emotional shifts. She could walk into a room and feel tension before anyone spoke. She noticed silences, pauses, the slight delay before someone answered a simple question, which makes this next part almost unbearable. Because if anyone sensed danger coming, it was her. A mother's instinct that wouldn't turn off. Michelle was the first to notice that Nick's silence wasn't calm. It was closed. She told a close friend months before the incident. I don't think he's angry anymore. I think he's past that. Past anger sounds peaceful, doesn't it? It's not. It's resignation. It's detachment. It's when someone stops trying to be understood. And for a mother, that's terrifying. Michelle kept a private notebook. Nothing dramatic, nothing theatrical. Grocery lists, reminders, doctor appointments. But scattered between them were short lines written in the margins. Nick didn't eat today. Nick avoided eye contact. Nick seems gone. Gone. Not sad. Not upset. Gone. The therapist's warning. Remember that therapist Nick called after his arrest? Michelle had called the same therapist weeks earlier. That detail didn't surface until much later. According to someone familiar with the sessions, Michelle wasn't asking how to fix Nick anymore. She wasn't asking about treatment plans or interventions. She asked something much simpler. Should I be scared? Think about that. A mother, asking if she should be afraid of her own son. The therapist reportedly told her that fear isn't something to dismiss. That intuition matters. That if she felt unsafe, she needed to protect herself. But Michelle didn't want protection. She wanted reassurance. And she never really got it. The house became smaller. Here's something subtle, but crucial. Michelle stopped using parts of the house. The back patio? Rarely. The pool area? Almost never. The side hallway connecting to the guest house? Completely avoided. She changed her routine. Parked closer to the entrance. Kept her phone charged at all times. Slept lighter. Friends noticed she'd flinch at unexpected noises. One friend said Michelle once laughed it off by saying, I guess I've watched too many crime shows. But the laugh didn't reach her eyes. And sometimes, humor is just fear trying to pass as normal. A marriage under quiet strain. Michelle and Rob loved each other deeply. That much is undeniable. But Nick was the fault line. Rob believed in space, in autonomy, in not hovering. Michelle believed in proximity, in presence, in never letting someone feel abandoned. Those two philosophies collided when it came to their son. Rob reportedly said during an argument, if we keep treating him like he's dangerous, he'll become dangerous. Michelle replied, and if we keep pretending he isn't, we'll miss the moment he is. Neither of them was wrong, and neither of them won. The word she didn't want to use. Michelle avoided one word at all costs. Violent. She wouldn't say it, wouldn't write it, wouldn't even think it, if she could help it. Instead, she used softer phrases. Unpredictable, unstable, not himself. But fear doesn't care what language you use. It shows up in behavior, in caution, in preparation, in the way you scan a room before sitting down. Michelle began locking her bedroom door at night. That detail came from a housekeeper who noticed the lock had been changed. Let that sink in. A mother locking her door. From her child. The dinner that never happened. The night before everything ended, Michelle tried one more time. Not therapy. Not confrontation. Not ultimatums. Dinner. She cooked. Set the table. Lit candles. Rob sat down. Waited. Nick didn't come. Michelle got up, walked to the side door, and hesitated. That hesitation matters. Because it suggests she was weighing something. Fear versus hope. She knocked. No answer. She knocked again. Nick opened the door just enough to look at her. She didn't scold him. Didn't lecture. Didn't beg. She simply said, "We're here." According to one account, Nick stared at her for a long moment, then said, "I know," and closed the door. What does "I know" mean? Those two words haunted Rob afterward. I know. Not "I'll come." Not "I'm busy." Not even "leave me alone." Just acknowledgement. As if Nick already understood what Michelle was offering, and had already rejected it. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. People don't always lash out because they're angry. Sometimes they lash out because they've decided the relationship is already over. The morning Michelle didn't wake up. When Romy found the bodies, she reportedly screamed for her mother first. That detail doesn't appear in police summaries, but it appears in witness recollections. Mom, Mom, over and over. Michelle had always been the responder, the fixer, the one who came running. That morning she didn't. And in that moment, Romy understood something terrible. The fear her mother had been carrying alone was now hers. The sentence Michelle never heard. After Nick's arrest, investigators learned something chilling. The therapist Nick called, the same one Michelle had spoken to weeks earlier, told police that Nick repeated a sentence several times during the call. A sentence Michelle had once said about him. "She thinks I'm dangerous." Not angry. Not sad. Dangerous. Nick didn't sound offended. He sounded validated. As if the word he'd avoided his entire life had finally been spoken out loud. And once it was, there was no going back. The tragedy of being right too late. Michelle wasn't blind. She wasn't naive. She wasn't weak. She was afraid. And she didn't know what to do with that fear, because admitting it felt like betraying her child. That's the part no one wants to talk about. How fear and love can exist at the same time. How acknowledging danger doesn't mean you stop caring. How sometimes the most loving thing to do is also the hardest. Michelle tried to love through it. And that choice, however human, cost her everything. The warning that changed everything. When Romy spoke to police, there was one phrase she used that would reshape the investigation. She didn't say Nick might be involved. She didn't say Nick had problems. She said, "There's someone in this family who is dangerous, and you should look at him." That sentence didn't come from nowhere. It came from months of whispered fear, from doors quietly locked, from dinners left untouched. And in the next chapter, we'll uncover how that warning, spoken out loud for the first time, sent shockwaves through the case and turned suspicion into certainty. What does it take to speak the truth when it means turning in your own blood? In every family, there are lines you're not supposed to cross, secrets you're meant to keep buried, names you don't say out loud. But when Reiner made that call, when she finally gave voice to the fear her mother had only ever whispered, she did more than report a crime. She shattered a pact of silence. She put truth ahead of loyalty. And in doing so, she became the one person in the Reiner family willing to confront the monster no one else dared to face. The morning, everything changed. It started with a smell. That's what Romy would later say. She'd arrived at the house around 9:40 a.m. on December 14th. She was supposed to have brunch with Michelle. Nothing formal, just coffee, fruit, maybe a walk by the garden. But the moment she stepped inside the front door, something felt wrong. Too quiet, too still. And then that smell, sharp, metallic, unmistakable. Blood. She didn't scream right away, didn't panic, didn't run. She walked, slowly, carefully, almost like her body already knew what her mind wasn't ready to accept. The scene that changed her forever. Michelle was the first one she saw. Slumped sideways, near the fireplace. Eyes open, but empty. There were no signs of a struggle. No tipped-over furniture. No broken glass. Just her mother. Still. Cold. Gone. Romy stumbled back, ran to her father's office, hoping, maybe, that he'd be on the phone, unaware. Maybe this was a heart attack. A terrible fall. Maybe there was time. But Rob was gone too. He was seated at his desk. A single wound to the chest. Eyes half shut. His hand still resting near a pen, as if he'd been writing. It wasn't just a murder scene. It was a message. The call that cut through the static. 9:56 a.m. Romy dialed 911. Her voice, captured in the dispatch audio, wasn't hysterical. It was sharp. Focused. My parents are dead. I need someone here. Now. When the operator asked if there was anyone else in the home, Romy paused. She didn't say no. She didn't say yes. She said, I think you should check the guest house. And then, with a breath that's barely audible on the tape, she added, There's someone in this family who is dangerous, and you should look at him. The meaning behind her words. That sentence echoed through the LAPD station. Because she didn't say Nick's name. She didn't have to. In a family that had avoided hard conversations for years, Romy made her meaning crystal clear. And the silence that followed? That was the sound of a daughter choosing truth over fear. But it wasn't a decision she made lightly. Because Romy had spent years living in Nick's shadow. Not just as the younger sibling, but as the silent observer. The one who watched her mother cry through locked bathroom doors. The one who heard late-night arguments whispered through walls. The one who saw her father's hands tremble after yet another failed attempt at fixing his son. The journal entry that changed everything. Later that week, Romy was interviewed again. This time, detectives asked if she'd seen anything suspicious in the days leading up to the murders. She hesitated. Then produced something that shifted the case completely. A page torn from her own journal. It wasn't written for police. It wasn't a letter. It was a raw, scribbled-out venting session from 2 weeks earlier. I don't trust Nick. I want to. I've tried. But something in him feels hollow. Like he's playing a role, and the script keeps changing. Mom says he's healing, but healing people don't stare at you like you're the problem. I wish I could say this out loud. Now she had. And that journal page became part of the case file. Proof that the fear didn't come from nowhere. The moment she snapped. Sources close to the investigation revealed that Romy had tried, multiple times, to convince her parents to install a security lock on the door between the guest house and the main house. Michelle resisted. She said it would send the wrong message. Rob dismissed it, said Nick was doing better. But Romy? She felt something coming. And the night before the murders, she sent a text to her best friend. I'm going there tomorrow. I don't want to. But Mom asked. What was supposed to be brunch became a breaking point. And now, she was the one holding the shards. The weight of testifying. Imagine this. You're 27. Your parents are dead. Your brother is the prime suspect. And the police ask you to testify. Romy didn't hesitate. She told them everything. The locked doors. The whisper fights. The moments her mother flinched when Nick entered a room. But what haunted her most wasn't what she said. It was what she hadn't said sooner. She reportedly told a detective. I thought if I said it out loud, it would make it real. I didn't want it to be real. But it was. And now, she was the only one left who could say the things Michelle never had the chance to. Why she waited so long. People judge silence too easily. But silence isn't weakness. Sometimes, it's self-protection. Romy grew up in a house where tension was always disguised as complexity. Nick's moods were artistic. His isolation was focused. His aggression was misunderstood. And calling any of that what it really was felt like betrayal. Until it became survival. The moment she saw him after. When officers brought Nick out in cuffs, Romy was still on the property. Sitting on the curb. Wrapped in a blanket. Staring at the ground. Nick didn't struggle. He didn't look panicked. He looked detached. Like this was just another step in a plan already written. But when he passed Romy, he stopped. Just for a moment. And he said one word. Not sorry. Not why. He said. Expected. She didn't respond. Because there was nothing left to say. The one thing she forgot to mention. 2 days later, Romy returned to the police station with a realization. There was one thing she hadn't told them. Something small. almost forgettable. But it would become the first domino in a trail of evidence the public had never seen before. And once investigators followed that lead, everything they thought they knew about the case would start to unravel. What if the moment you thought everything ended was actually the moment it began? In every crime story, there's a moment of clarity, a timestamp, a before and after, something clean. But not here, because this case, this timeline, it didn't make sense. Not to the police, not to the family, not to Romy. And once the pieces started to shift, the whole truth, the real truth, slipped right out from under the evidence. They've forgotten detail that unlocked everything. 2 days after giving her initial statement, Romy returned to the station. She was pale, exhausted, shaking. She sat down across from the same detective she'd spoken to before and said, "I remembered something." What she described seemed small, meaningless, but it wasn't. She said she'd gotten a text from her mother the night before the murder. It read, "He's in the main house. Be careful tomorrow. I'm keeping things calm." It was sent at 10:24 p.m. on Saturday, December 13th. Why did that matter? Because according to Nick's alibi, he was in the guest house all night. Alone, unbothered, isolated. Michelle's message shattered that claim. He'd already been inside, already made his move. And Michelle knew. She didn't panic. She didn't call 911. She didn't wake Rob. She stayed quiet and tried to keep things calm. That message would become Exhibit A in dismantling Nick's version of events. But it was only the beginning. The surveillance footage that wasn't. Let's talk cameras. The Reiner estate was outfitted with an elite private security system. Motion sensors, gate controls, exterior cameras, everything top of the line. So naturally, when investigators reviewed the night in question, they expected clarity. Instead, they found a black hole. Between 9:41 p.m. and 11:02 p.m., there was no footage. Not glitched, not blurred, missing. Hard drive logs showed a manual access at 8:57 p.m. Someone had entered the system and erased exactly 81 minutes of footage. And where was the access point? The guest house. Not only had Nick allegedly been inside the main house earlier than thought, he also erased any visual proof of it. Which begs the question, why that specific time? What happened between 9:41 and 11:02 that he didn't want the world to see? The door that shouldn't have been open. Another inconsistency emerged from the forensics team. The interior security logs showed the side hallway door, the one connecting the main house to the guest house, had been opened at 10:19 p.m. and closed again at 10:31 p.m. The problem? That door was supposed to be permanently sealed. Not bolted shut, but sealed with a custom lock and motion alarm. Yet somehow it opened, silently. That detail had one of two implications. Nick had found a way to bypass the alarm system. Or someone let him in. Either way, that 12-minute gap would become one of the most contested windows in the trial. Because if Michelle let him in, it wasn't a break-in. It was something much more unsettling. A final chance. A mother's gamble. One last try to reach the unreachable. Rob's laptop, the unsent email. At 11:36 p.m., Rob Reiner opened his laptop. He drafted an email. Subject line: Urgent, family situation. The message was addressed to two people. One was a private family attorney. The other, a former therapist. Here's where it gets disturbing. He never hit send. The email was recovered in drafts. And it read, "We may need help. Things are escalating. I'm worried about Michelle. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but I don't feel safe in my own home tonight." That draft was time-stamped 11:42 p.m. His body was found at 6:48 a.m., still seated at that same desk. Laptop open. Email unsent. No signs of struggle. Just a man who, in his final act, tried to get ahead of something he already knew had arrived. Nick's version unravels. When police first questioned Nick, he gave a clean, emotionless timeline. "I was in the guest house all night. I didn't hear anything. I slept through it. No emotion. No hesitation." He even gave them his own phone to check. Said it had been on airplane mode. But the tech forensics team found something strange. At exactly 10:58 p.m., Nick's phone was removed from airplane mode for 17 seconds. During that time, a Google search was conducted. How to erase home security footage. Let that sink in. He turned off airplane mode just long enough to search for that phrase. Then went dark again. Investigators later confirmed the system erasure happened within 15 minutes of that search. The blanket theory. There was one final strange detail. Michelle's body was partially covered with a blanket. Not entirely. Just her lower half. Forensic analysts couldn't explain why. It wasn't a defensive gesture. It didn't obscure evidence. It wasn't consistent with a frantic crime. It was deliberate. And that led to one terrifying conclusion. Whoever killed Michelle didn't panic afterward. They lingered. They chose to partially cover her. Not out of remorse, but out of control. A final, silent assertion of dominance. And guess where that specific blanket came from? The guest house. Contradictions upon contradictions. Here's a brief breakdown of the timeline Nick gave versus what was uncovered. Time Nick's claim evidence. 9 p.m. alone in guest house door log shows interior door opened at 10:19 p.m. 10 p.m. watching a movie, no streaming history found after 8:40 p.m. 11 p.m. asleep phone accessed at 10:58 p.m. Google search conducted. 12 a.m. to 8 a.m. sleeping no motion detected in guest house until 6:14 a.m. Everything he claimed fell apart. But here's the haunting twist. He didn't deny the crime. Even as the evidence mounted, Nick remained calm. He didn't protest, didn't argue. He just said, again and again, "I said what I said." The sentence that didn't belong. While reviewing Nick's phone again, police discovered a drafted note. It hadn't been sent or posted anywhere. It was buried inside a private notes app. Its final line was chilling. They should have listened the first time. What was the first time? Who didn't listen? And what had he already tried to tell them? The answers were in a place no one wanted to look. And in the next chapter, we'll step into the arrest night, where calm turned into confession, and the truth spilled out in a voice no one recognized. Why would a man sit calmly in the shadow of the bodies he left behind? That's what every officer, every detective, every forensic expert asked. Because Nick Reiner didn't run. He didn't cry. He didn't fight. He waited. Sat alone in the guest house, the lights off, door unlocked. As if the final scene in his twisted screenplay had come to an end, and now, he was just waiting for the credits to roll. But what happened during those final moments before the arrest, and what Nick said in the hours that followed, would fracture every remaining illusion about who he really was. 6:48 a.m., Romy's scream. The morning sun had barely crested over Brentwood when the 911 call was placed. But long before the police arrived, something else happened, something only a few would ever know. According to one neighbor, Romy's scream was what drew them to the street. It wasn't a single, piercing cry. It was a wave, a series of broken sobs spilling out of the house like smoke from a fire no one could put out. And still, Nick didn't move. Because while chaos erupted in the main house, Nick was already in the guest house. Alone. Still. Waiting. 7:14 a.m., the first officers arrive. Officers Martinez and Livingston were the first on the scene. They later recounted to investigators how eerily clean the property looked from the outside. No broken windows. No signs of forced entry. Just a luxury estate basking in morning light. But once inside, the stench of blood hit instantly. The heavy air. The eerie silence. The untouched kitchen. The open laptop. And then, Romy, sitting on the floor, rocking back and forth, clutching her knees. She didn't say much. Just one sentence, again and again. He was already here. It was all they needed. 7:27 a.m., door to the guest house. 3 officers approached the side door. No barricade. No dogs. No panic. They knocked. Nothing. Knocked again. Still silence. Then, slowly, the door creaked open. Nick Reiner sat on the couch. Shirtless. Cross-legged. Hands resting on his knees. The room smelled faintly of bleach and lavender. One officer later testified. He looked like a man who just finished meditating. Not like someone who just, well, not like a suspect. No blood. No visible injuries. Just blankness. The room was clean. Too clean. But in the far corner, beneath the wooden end table, they found it. A folded kitchen towel. Stained dark. Still damp. 7:38 a.m., the arrest. Nick Reiner, you are under arrest for suspicion of murder. Those words rang out. And Nick? He didn't flinch. Didn't twitch. Didn't blink. He stood, calmly placed his hands behind his back, and said only one thing. Don't waste your time in the house. You already know. Already know what? That question would hang over the entire interrogation. Because from the moment they cuffed him, Nick wasn't acting confused. He wasn't denying. He wasn't scrambling. He was composed. Like this was the inevitable conclusion he'd already written, and now he was just reciting his lines. 8:02 a.m., the ride to the station. During the car ride, Officer Livingston tried to make conversation. Standard protocol. See if the suspect talks, mumbles, reacts. But Nick said nothing. Instead, he stared out the window and tapped his fingers on the door in a slow, rhythmic pattern. 1, 2, 3, pause. 1, 2, 3, pause. Almost like a metronome. When asked what he was thinking about, Nick turned, smirked, and replied, "Nothing new. Nothing new? 2 people were dead. His parents. And he felt nothing new? What does that say?" 8:34 a.m., the interrogation room. They sat him down, Mirandized him. Brought in 2 homicide detectives. They offered water. He declined. Asked if he needed a lawyer. He shrugged. Told him this was his opportunity to speak. He nodded, then went quiet. For 11 minutes, no one spoke. Then, Detective Farrow broke the silence. "You know why you're here?" Nick smiled. A soft, thin-lipped smile. One that didn't reach his eyes. "Because people don't listen until the bodies start talking." Let that sink in. That was his opener. Not a confession. Not a denial. A thesis. Like he'd been rehearsing this line for months. Maybe years. The confession, that broke the room. What followed wasn't a confession. Not in the traditional sense. Nick didn't say, "I killed them." He didn't say, "Here's how I did it." What he said was worse. He gave them motives disguised as monologues. Fury masked as philosophy. Hatred wrapped in poetry. He spoke for nearly 40 minutes without stopping. Here are just a few direct quotes recorded by the detectives. "Everyone wants to be the hero of the story. What they don't realize is some of us were written as the villain from page 1. They wanted a quiet house, not a healthy son. This wasn't rage. Rage burns fast. This was justice. Cold. Calculated. Necessary. I did it. And I'll do it over and over again if I have to." Because no one listened the first time. The room went still. After that last line, Detective Farrow asked the only thing left to ask. "Nick, are you confessing?" And Nick, still smiling, said, "You tell me." That became the quote that headlined every newspaper. "You tell me." Chilling. Deflective. Unshakably arrogant. A man who knew he didn't need to confess. Because he knew the evidence would do it for him. And the truth? The truth was already bleeding through every inch of that house. The call to the therapist. But here's the part that no one knew until weeks later. After the initial interrogation, Nick was placed in holding. During booking, he was allowed one call. He didn't call a lawyer. Not a friend. Not even Romy. He called his former therapist. And what he said, recorded, time-stamped, was this: "I just wanted you to know, the silence is over. They can't ignore me now." The therapist, stunned, didn't speak. Nick ended the call with one final whisper. "You always said I'd either disappear or make history. I picked one." The hidden recording. Unbeknownst to Nick, investigators had already found something else. Tucked inside a drawer in his guest house. A flash drive. Unlabeled. Encrypted. But once cracked, it contained a single audio file. Roughly 17 minutes long. No timestamps. No introductions. Just Nick. Talking to himself. Or to someone. And the final words on that recording would chill the prosecution to the bone. Because what he said on that file made it clear. This wasn't just a crime. It was a performance. What kind of man doesn't just admit to murder, but embraces it like a masterpiece? That was the question racing through the minds of every detective, every prosecutor, every forensic profiler when they heard it. Nick Reiner didn't just confess. He claimed it. And the way he did it? The tone. The calm. The delivery. It was like watching an actor nail the final scene of a film he'd written himself. The file on the flash drive was the smoking gun no one had expected. And when the audio played in that cold little evidence room, just 17 minutes long, it rewrote the entire case. The file, rewrites. The audio file wasn't titled Confession. It wasn't labeled Journal or Recording. It was titled Rewrites. Just one word. A term from the world Nick knew all too well, screenwriting. Rewrites are what you do when the first version isn't good enough. When a story needs to be cleaner, sharper, more impactful. That title was more than a name. It was a statement. This wasn't real life. Not to him. This was a script that had been in production for years. And now? He was finalizing the ending. The first few minutes, calm before the storm. The file begins with silence. Then, a chair creaks. A quiet inhale. And finally, Nick's voice. I always knew it would end like this. People think life is linear, but it isn't. It's circular, repetitive, broken scenes on loop. He's not talking to anyone. Or maybe he is, us. A future audience. A jury. A viewer. He continues. They told me I was sick. Maybe I am. But what they don't understand is that sickness grows in silence. In our house, it was so damn quiet. Then comes a pause. And the next line? I killed them. Simple. Flat. Unshaken. Like he was saying he took the trash out. Cold. Methodical. Proud. He goes on. I didn't scream. I didn't rush. I waited. I waited until the house was asleep. Not just the people in it. I waited until it stopped pretending. He doesn't describe the act in graphic detail. But what he does describe is why. Mom wanted peace. Dad wanted distance. I gave them both. And then, almost poetically, a blade doesn't just cut flesh. It cuts expectation, legacy, control. That line chilled the lead detective to the core. Because it wasn't just a confession. It was a mission statement. Nick didn't see this as crime. He saw it as correction. The scripted nature of a crime. At the 9-minute mark, Nick says, people always say they snapped. But no, I rehearsed this. For years. Like dialogue. Like stage direction. He even admits he chose the knife over a gun for one reason. Guns end things too fast. They don't let you feel the moment stretch. Let that sink in. This wasn't rage. This was theater. And every choice, every breath, was part of his final act. He knew about the cameras, the timeline, the inconsistencies, and he didn't care. They'll never understand why. Because they never listened when it mattered. So now they'll listen when they can't respond. A letter without ink. The final few minutes of the audio shift. Nick grows quieter, slower, reflective. He talks about Romy. She was the only one who saw me. Not who they wanted me to be. Then, something truly unexpected. Tell her I'm sorry. The only apology in the entire file. Not to his parents. Not to the world. Just, Romy. And then, I didn't do this to destroy them. I did this because they wouldn't let me exist. Another pause. But maybe now I do. And the file ends. Just like that. The room was frozen. When the audio ended, no one spoke. The detective who played the file reportedly turned to the others and said, this isn't insanity. This is ego. And he was right. Nick didn't sound broken. Didn't sound lost. He sounded found. Like this act had given him the identity he'd been denied his whole life. Not son. Not writer. Not disappointment. Killer. And that was a role he had written for himself. Why no one saw it coming? Here's the terrifying part. Nothing in the weeks leading up to the murders indicated Nick was planning anything. He hadn't bought a weapon. He hadn't searched disturbing content online. He hadn't even argued with his parents recently. He'd just gone quiet. And in that silence, he planned everything. This wasn't a snap. This wasn't a psychotic break. This was a man who saw his life as a film and wanted to take control of the ending. The prosecutor's nightmare. When this audio was presented to the DA, it created a paradox. On one hand, it was an airtight confession, uncoerced, voluntary, precise. On the other, it was crafted like performance art. If Nick's defense argued mental illness, the audio could back it up. But if the prosecution argued premeditation, they had their proof. Because this wasn't a man losing control. This was a man seizing it. The chilling final quote. In court documents later filed, a line from the transcript was highlighted in bold. They always wanted a son who could make them proud. I gave them a legacy they'll never forget. Those words weren't spoken in anger. They were spoken like a closing line. And when the tape ended, the police knew something chilling. Nick hadn't just murdered his parents. He'd tried to immortalize himself in the process. The reaction that said everything. When Romy was shown the transcript of the recording, she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply asked, was that his real voice? Because it didn't sound like my brother. And what she said next, quietly, almost to herself, left the room in stunned silence. It sounded like someone playing him. But if that wasn't Nick Reiner speaking, then who or what was? What kind of monster doesn't regret what he did, but regrets he didn't do more? Nick Reiner didn't just confess to killing his parents. He leaned into it, not as a man consumed by guilt, but as a man convinced he was right. as if the killings weren't an outburst or accident, but a calculated act of meaning, a twisted declaration. And when he said those 6 words, "I'd do it over and over again," he wasn't looking for forgiveness. He was challenging us to stop him. The echo of a statement no one could unhear. "I did it, and I'd do it again." Those words weren't just spoken in the interrogation room. Nick repeated them in court, in the presence of Romy, in front of the media, on the record. No stutter, no remorse, and no ambiguity. The prosecutor froze. The judge leaned back in stunned silence. Even his own public defender reportedly whispered, "Jesus Christ," because in one line, Nick burned the entire legal strategy to the ground. This wasn't about insanity anymore. This wasn't a cry for help. It was a manifesto. The chilling calm of repetition. Let's break it down. Nick didn't scream the line. He didn't pound the table. He didn't smile either. He said it like it was nothing, like ordering a drink. That tone, that eerie, practiced tone, sent chills through the courtroom. Psychiatrists observing the case later said it was one of the clearest displays of moral detachment they'd ever seen. One wrote in their report, "Reiner shows complete separation from normative emotional response. His pride in the act, his desire to repeat it, speaks to a personality consumed with control, not chaos." Control. That's the key. Nick wasn't out of control that night. He was in absolute control, and he wanted everyone to know it. The second recording no one knew existed. A week after the initial audio file was released, investigators found a second flash drive hidden behind a false panel in the guest house closet. This one wasn't labeled rewrites. It was labeled final draft. And what was on it? A video. Grainy, low-res, but unmistakably Nick, facing the camera, alone in his room, wearing the same clothes he was arrested in. And for 6 minutes, he spoke directly to the camera, the monologue that made everything worse. Here's a transcript excerpt from the video. Most people wait their entire lives for someone to see them, to really see them. But when your father is Rob Reiner, and your mother is the glue of a Hollywood empire, no one's looking at the ghost in the corner. He takes a breath. I tried to be what they wanted. Smart, quiet, grateful, broken, but manageable. He laughs. But I'm not manageable. Then he leans in, face inches from the lens, and says, "And if I had the chance, I'd do it again. Just like this. Maybe cleaner, maybe bigger. But the result? Always the same." That moment, it turned a double homicide into a threat. Because now, prosecutors argued, Nick wasn't just unremorseful. He was dangerous, capable, intelligent, ready to do it all again. And maybe, if circumstances allowed, worse. How the public reacted. News outlets ate it up. Nick Reiner, Hollywood's coldest killer. The son who smiled at his sentence. "I'd do it again." The words that broke a family. Debates exploded online. Was Nick a product of failed parenting? Mental illness? Hollywood pressure? Or was he just evil? The internet became a courtroom of its own. Some sympathized. Others demanded the death penalty. But everyone agreed on one thing. Nick Reiner wasn't done talking. Romy's breaking point. When Romy saw the second video, something in her changed. Until that point, she had remained quiet, composed. But during a closed-door court recess, she reportedly stood up in front of Nick and screamed, "You still think this is about you? You still think you're the victim?" Nick blinked once, then smiled. That smile? It broke her. Romy collapsed. Had to be escorted out. Later, in her victim impact statement, she said, "He didn't just kill them. He tried to make art out of it. And I will never forgive him for that." The therapist's analysis that shook the court. Dr. Lily Mathis, a forensic psychologist brought in by the state, gave a haunting testimony. She watched both recordings, interviewed Nick twice, studied his journals, and her conclusion? Nick Reiner is not legally insane. He is criminally sane. And he committed these murders with full awareness and pride. She went further. He exhibits signs of narcissistic personality disorder with sadistic traits. But these traits don't excuse him, they expose him. Then she said something that made headlines. Nick Reiner wanted to be remembered. And now, he will be. But not for his pain. For his cruelty. The trial's turning point. There was a moment, during closing arguments, where the prosecutor played a clip from Nick's video. The clip ended. The room fell silent. Then the prosecutor turned to the jury and asked, "Do you really want to give a man like this another chance to rewrite the ending?" No one looked at Nick. Not even Nick. Because he wasn't watching the jury. He wasn't watching his lawyer. He was looking at the camera in the courtroom, staring right into the lens. Like he was speaking to us again. Mini cliffhanger, the letter that shouldn't exist. 3 days before sentencing, a letter arrived at the district attorney's office. Handwritten. No return address. Inside, a page torn from one of Nick's old journals. And at the bottom, scrawled in red ink, was one cryptic line. I told you, I'd do it again. But Nick was in jail. No contact. No visitors. So how did this letter get sent? And more terrifying, was someone else involved?